15 armed men surround the ranch, torches blazing in the darkness. The preacher's voice cuts through the night like a blade. "We know what you are, Morrison. We know what kind of men you harbor here." Cade Morrison steps forward, rifle steady, his young partner beside him. Tonight, their secret dies, or they do. Before we dive in, comment where in the world you are watching from, and don't forget to click subscribe. The dust hung thick in the air as Jonas Crawford stepped off the stagecoach, his worn leather bag clutched tight against his chest. 22 years old, rail-thin from hunger, with hands that had never known real labor. The Montana Territory stretched before him like an unforgiving promise, all red, earth, and endless sky. He had come west with nothing but desperate hope and a crumpled advertisement torn from a newspaper. Help wanted, ranch hand, room and board provided, no experience necessary. What the advertisement had not mentioned was the size of the man who owned the place. Cade Morrison stood 6'7" in his boots, with shoulders broad enough to block out the sun. His hands were the size of dinner plates, scarred and calloused from decades of hard work. At 45, his body was a monument to strength, all thick muscle and weathered skin that spoke of nights under stars and days breaking horses that lesser men could not touch. His beard was trimmed close, streaked with silver, and his eyes were the color of storm clouds, pale gray and unreadable. Jonas felt those eyes on him the moment he stepped into the ranch yard, and something in his chest tightened like a fist. "You the boy from the advertisement?" Cade's voice was gravel and honey, rough but somehow warm. "Yes, sir." Jonas Crawford. His own voice sounded thin, reedy. Everything about him felt small, standing in this man's shadow. Cade looked him over slowly, taking in the threadbare coat, the 2 large boots, the trembling in those delicate hands. "You ever worked a ranch before?" "No, sir, but I learn quick. I promise I will work harder than anyone you have ever." "Can you ride?" "I can learn." "Can you rope?" "I can learn that too." Cade's expression did not change, but something flickered in those gray eyes. Amusement, maybe, or pity. "What can you do?" Jonas swallowed hard. The truth was humiliating, but he had nothing left to hide behind. "I can read and write. I can keep accounts. I am good with numbers, and I do not complain." The silence that followed felt heavy as stone. Somewhere across the yard, horses snorted and stamped. The wind carried the scent of hay and leather and something else, something masculine and overwhelming that made Jonas's pulse quicken in a way he did not understand. "Room and board," Cade said finally. "You will work dawn to dusk. You will do what I tell you, when I tell you. No questions, no hesitation." He stepped closer, and Jonas had to tilt his head back to meet those eyes. "Can you follow instructions, boy?" The word boy sent heat flooding through Jonas's body. He nodded, not trusting his voice. "Say it." "Yes, sir. I can follow instructions." Cade held his gaze for one more breath, and Jonas felt something shift in the air between them. Something dangerous and electric that made his skin prickle with awareness. "Good. Drop your bag in the bunkhouse. 3rd building on the left, then meet me at the corral. We will see what you are made of." Jonas watched the massive man walk away, his broad back cutting through the sunlight like a blade. His hands were shaking worse now, but it was not from fear. It was something far more terrifying. The bunkhouse was empty when Jonas entered. Nothing but rough wooden bunks and the smell of old tobacco. He chose the bed farthest from the door, tucked his few belongings beneath the thin mattress, and pressed his palms against his thighs to stop the trembling. He had left Chicago because he had no choice. The factory had closed. His mother had died. The landlord had thrown him into the street with nothing but the clothes on his back and a handful of coins that would not last a week. The West had seemed like salvation, a place where a man could disappear and start over. But standing in this rough cabin, breathing the scent of sweat and dust and masculine presence, Jonas realized he had not thought this through. He had never been around men like Cade Morrison, men who took up space like they owned the very air, men whose voices made something in his belly twist and heat. He splashed water on his face from the basin by the door, trying to steady himself. Then he walked out into the blinding sunlight toward the corral where Cade waited. The rancher stood beside a massive chestnut stallion, one hand resting on the animal's neck. The horse was enormous, wild-eyed and stamping, clearly unbroken. Cade's hand moved in slow, deliberate strokes along the animal's shoulder, and Jonas found himself staring at those fingers, thick and capable, moving with surprising gentleness. "This is Copper," Cade said without looking up. "Got him 3 weeks ago. He has thrown every man who tried to ride him." Jonas took a cautious step closer. "What do you want me to do?" Now Cade did look up, and there was something challenging in his expression. "I want you to brush him down." "Sir, I know. That is why I am telling you to do it." Cade held out a brush, waiting. Jonas's heart hammered against his ribs as he approached. The horse's muscles rippled beneath its coat, power barely contained. He reached for the brush, and his fingers touched Cade's palm for just a moment. The contact sent electricity racing up his arm. Cade's eyes narrowed slightly, like he had felt it too. "Start at his shoulder," the rancher said, his voice lower now, almost intimate. "Long strokes. Firm but gentle. Let him feel your confidence, even if you do not have it yet." Jonas pressed the brush to the horse's coat and pulled it down in a trembling stroke. Copper shifted, snorting, and Jonas flinched back. "Easy." Cade moved behind him, so close Jonas could feel the heat radiating from that massive body. "He can sense your fear. You have to show him you are not afraid." "But I am afraid," Jonas whispered. "Then lie better." A hand settled on Jonas's shoulder, heavy and warm, and every nerve in his body came alive. Cade guided his arm, helping him find the rhythm. "There, like that. Steady. Do not stop." They stood that way for what felt like an eternity, Cade's chest almost touching Jonas's back, his hand a burning weight on his shoulder, guiding each stroke. The horse began to calm, its breathing evening out, and Jonas realized his own breath had synchronized with Cade's, deep and slow. "Good," Cade murmured, his voice right beside Jonas's ear. "You are doing good." The praise hit Jonas like a physical thing, warming him from the inside out. He had not realized how much he craved approval from this man until it was given, and now he wanted more of it, wanted to hear that rough voice tell him again that he was good, that he was doing well, that he was... Cade stepped back abruptly, breaking the spell. "Finish the job. Then come find me at the barn. We have fence posts to dig before sundown." Jonas nodded, not trusting himself to speak. He listened to the heavy footfalls fade across the yard, and only when he was alone did he allow himself to exhale. His hands were still shaking, but now he knew it had nothing to do with the horse. The work was brutal. By the time the sun began its descent toward the horizon, Jonas's entire body screamed with pain. His palms were blistered and bleeding. His back felt like it might snap. Sweat soaked through his shirt, and dust caked his skin until he barely recognized himself. But he did not complain. He did not ask to stop. He simply gritted his teeth and kept swinging the post-hole digger. Kept hauling rocks. Kept doing exactly what Cade told him to do. And Cade watched. Jonas could feel those gray eyes on him constantly, assessing, measuring, waiting for him to break. He refused to break. When the dinner bell finally rang across the ranch, Jonas dropped the digger and stood swaying on his feet, vision blurring at the edges. Cade appeared beside him, holding out a canteen. "Drink." Jonas took it with shaking hands and drank deeply, water spilling down his chin. When he lowered the canteen, Cade was still watching him with that unreadable expression. "You did not quit," the rancher said. "No, sir. Most men would have. I am not most men." Something shifted in Cade's face then, something dark and hungry that made Jonas's breath catch. The rancher reached out and wiped the water from Jonas's chin with his thumb, a gesture so casual and yet so intimate that it froze Jonas in place. "No," Cade said softly. "I do not believe you are." Then he turned and walked toward the main house, leaving Jonas standing alone in the fading light, his skin burning where Cade's thumb had touched. That night, Jonas lay in his bunk, unable to sleep despite his exhaustion. The other ranch hands had returned after supper, rough men with hard faces who nodded at him but said little. They snored now in the darkness, a chorus of masculine sounds that should have been comforting but only made Jonas feel more alone. He kept replaying the day in his mind, the weight of Cade's hand on his shoulder, the roughness of that voice in his ear, the casual intimacy of that thumb on his chin. He did not understand what was happening to him. He had never felt this way before. This constant awareness of another person's presence, this hunger for approval and attention, and something he could not even name. All he knew was that tomorrow he would wake before dawn and do it all over again, and some desperate part of him was counting the hours until he could stand in Cade Morrison's shadow once more. The days blurred together after that. Wake before sunrise, work until his body begged for mercy, eat in silence, work some more, collapse into bed with muscles screaming, dream of storm-gray eyes and hands the size of his future. Cade was relentless. He pushed Jonas harder than any of the other men, giving him the worst jobs, the heaviest loads, the most dangerous tasks. And Jonas took it all without complaint, driven by something he refused to examine too closely. On the 5th day, Cade told him to muck out the stables. Jonas had never done it before, but by now he knew better than to admit ignorance. He simply nodded and went to work, shoveling manure until his arms felt like they might fall off. The smell was overwhelming, the heat oppressive, and sweat poured down his face and back in rivers. He was bent over the wheelbarrow, breathing hard, when Cade appeared in the stable doorway. The rancher leaned against the frame, arms crossed over that massive chest, watching Jonas work with an expression that might have been amusement. "You missed a spot," Cade said. Jonas looked up, vision swimming with exhaustion. "Where?" "There." Cade pointed to the far corner. "And there. And over there." Jonas wanted to scream. Instead, he gripped the shovel tighter and went to the corner Cade had indicated. The older man followed, his presence filling the space like a storm front. "You are doing it wrong," Cade said. "Then show me how to do it right." The challenge in Jonas's voice surprised them both. For a moment, tension crackled between them, sharp as lightning. Then Cade stepped closer, reaching for the shovel. Like this. He demonstrated the proper angle, the efficient motion, and Jonas watched his hands, mesmerized by the competence, the easy strength. "You are wasting energy. Work smarter, not harder." "Yes, sir." Cade handed back the shovel, but he did not step away. They stood close enough that Jonas could smell him now, sweat and leather and something indefinably masculine that made his head spin. "You are not like the others," Cade said quietly. Jonas's pulse hammered in his throat. "Is that bad?" "I have not decided yet." The rancher's eyes traveled over Jonas's face, lingering on his mouth, and Jonas felt heat flood his body. He should step back, should put distance between them, should do anything except stand there drowning in that gray gaze. But he did not move. "You should clean up," Cade said finally, his voice rougher than before. "There is a creek beyond the ridge. Water is cold, but it will get the stink off you." Then he turned and left, and Jonas stood alone in the stable, breathing hard, wondering what had just happened, and why his entire body felt like it was on fire. He found the creek just as the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of crimson and gold. The water was icy when he stripped off his filthy clothes and waded in, gasping at the shock of it. But it felt good, washing away the sweat and dirt and exhaustion. He was scrubbing his arms when he heard footsteps on the bank. Cade stood at the water's edge, holding a bar of soap and a clean shirt. His eyes traveled over Jonas's bare chest, his wet skin, and something hungry flickered across his face before he schooled it back to neutrality. "Thought you might need these," he said, his voice carefully even. Jonas waded closer, water lapping at his waist, acutely aware of his nakedness and Cade's fully clothed presence. "Thank you, sir." Cade extended the soap, and Jonas took it, their fingers brushing again. That same electric shock raced between them. "You are stronger than you look," Cade said. "I have to be." "Why?" Jonas met his eyes, water dripping from his hair. "Because I have nowhere else to go. This is my last chance." Something shifted in Cade's expression then, understanding maybe, or recognition. "You running from something?" "No, sir, running towards something. I just do not know what it is yet." The confession hung between them, raw and honest. Cade's jaw tightened, and for a moment Jonas thought he might say something, might name this strange tension that had been building between them since the moment they met. Instead, he dropped the clean shirt on a rock and turned away. "Do not stay out too long. Water gets colder after dark." Jonas watched him disappear into the dusk, then sank deeper into the creek, letting the cold water numb his overheated skin. But nothing could numb the ache in his chest, the longing for something he could not name, the desperate need to understand why Cade Morrison's attention felt like the only thing keeping him alive. He stayed in the water until his teeth chattered, then dried off and pulled on the clean shirt. It was too big, clearly one of Cade's, and wearing it felt strangely intimate, like being wrapped in the man's presence. When he returned to the bunkhouse, the other hands were already asleep. Jonas lay in his bunk, wearing Cade's shirt, and wondered how much longer he could survive this slow, burning torture of wanting something he could not have, could not even fully understand. Tomorrow would bring more work, more pain, more moments of Cade's intense focus on him, and Jonas would endure it all, because the alternative, leaving this ranch, leaving Cade's presence, felt like death itself. He fell asleep thinking of storm-gray eyes and hands that could break him or build him. And in his dreams, those hands reached for him at last. The second week brought new challenges. Cade had Jonas working alongside him more often now, teaching him to rope, to shoe horses, to mend fences in the far pastures where they worked alone for hours with only the wind and the endless sky for company. Jonas learned to read the subtle shifts in Cade's mood, the way his voice dropped when he was pleased, the way his jaw tightened when Jonas made a mistake. And there were mistakes, so many of them. But Cade never lost his temper, never raised his voice. He simply corrected, demonstrated, waited for Jonas to try again. That patience was somehow more devastating than anger would have been. On a Thursday morning, while they were repairing fence line on the northern ridge, Jonas's rope work finally clicked. He lassoed the fence post on the first try, clean and smooth, and the victory surged through him like lightning. "I did it," he breathed, turning to Cade with a grin that felt foreign on his face. Cade's expression softened, just slightly, and something warm flickered in those gray eyes. "You did. Good work." Jonas's chest swelled with pride so fierce it hurt. He wanted to hear it again, wanted Cade to tell him he was good, he was capable, he was worth keeping around. But the rancher had already turned back to the fence, and the moment passed like smoke. They worked in silence for another hour, the sun climbing higher, sweat soaking through their shirts. Jonas was securing a wire when the tool slipped, slicing deep into his palm. He hissed, dropping everything, blood welling up fast and bright. Cade was there in an instant, his massive hand closing around Jonas's wrist. "Let me see." Jonas tried to pull away, embarrassed by his clumsiness. But Cade's grip was iron. The rancher examined the cut with surprising gentleness, his thumb brushing the edge of the wound. "Deep, but clean. Come on." He led Jonas to the wagon, rummaged through a pack, and produced a flask of whiskey and a strip of clean cloth. "This is going to hurt." Before Jonas could brace himself, Cade poured the alcohol directly into the wound. Fire exploded through Jonas's hand, and he bit down hard on his lip to keep from crying out. Cade wrapped the cloth around his palm with practiced efficiency, his huge hands somehow managing delicate precision. "You did not scream," Cade observed, tying off the bandage. "Would it have mattered if I did?" "No, but most men would have anyway." Cade released his hand but did not step back. They stood close, too close, and Jonas could see the faint lines at the corners of Cade's eyes, the silver threaded through his beard, the scar that ran along his jawline. "You are tougher than you look, boy." That word again, boy. It should have felt insulting, diminishing, but when Cade said it, something in Jonas's stomach twisted with heat. "I have to be," Jonas said quietly. "You do not accept weakness." Cade's eyes narrowed slightly. "Is that what you think? Is it not true?" For a long moment, Cade just looked at him, and Jonas felt stripped bare under that gaze, like every secret thought was written across his skin for the rancher to read. Then Cade reached up and, with devastating casualness, brushed a streak of dirt from Jonas's cheekbone. "Weakness and inexperience are not the same thing," he said, his voice low and rough as gravel. "One can be fixed, the other cannot." His hand lingered against Jonas's face for just a heartbeat too long, his calloused thumb tracing the sharp edge of Jonas's cheekbone. Then he pulled back, cleared his throat, and turned toward the wagon. "We are done for the day. Head back to the ranch. Get that hand cleaned properly." Jonas stood frozen, his cheek burning where Cade had touched him, his heart hammering so hard he thought it might break through his ribs. He watched the rancher climb into the wagon, watched those broad shoulders settle into the driver's seat, and wondered how much longer he could pretend he did not understand what was happening between them. That night, Jonas lay awake again, his bandaged hand throbbing in time with his pulse. The bunkhouse was quiet except for the usual chorus of snores, but Jonas's mind raced with images he could not stop. Cade's hands on his wrist, Cade's thumb on his cheek, Cade's eyes darkening with something that looked dangerously close to hunger. He had never wanted anyone before, had never understood what that kind of desire felt like, but now it consumed him. This aching need to be close to Cade, to earn his approval, to feel those hands on him again with intention instead of accident. It was wrong. He knew it was wrong. Men did not feel this way about other men, and even if they did, they certainly did not act on it. Not in Montana, not anywhere Jonas had ever been. The world had no place for what he was beginning to suspect lived inside him. But knowing it was wrong did nothing to stop the wanting. The next morning, Cade assigned Jonas to work in the main house. "The books need organizing," he said gruffly. "You said you were good with numbers. Prove it." The house was larger than Jonas had expected, built solid with timber and stone, furnished simply but well. Cade's presence saturated every room, his scent lingering in the air, his belongings scattered with the carelessness of a man who lived alone and answered to no one. Jonas found the ledgers in the study, a small room with a desk, a single chair, and shelves packed with books that surprised him. He had not imagined Cade as a reader, but here was evidence to the contrary. Agricultural manuals, yes, but also poetry, philosophy, even a few novels with cracked spines that suggested frequent reading. He settled into the work, losing himself in columns of numbers, invoices, livestock records. The ranch was profitable, but barely. Cade was stretched thin, carrying debt from a bad winter 2 years prior, paying his hands fairly when he could have paid them less. It painted a picture of a man who valued honor over profit, and that knowledge only deepened Jonas's fascination. He was so absorbed in the ledgers that he did not hear Cade enter until the rancher's shadow fell across the desk. "Find anything interesting?" Jonas looked up, startled, and found Cade leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed, watching him with that unreadable expression. How long had he been standing there? "Your records are a mess," Jonas said honestly, "but the ranch is solid. If you cut back on the feed costs and renegotiate with the supplier in town, you could save 15%, maybe 20%. Cade's eyebrows rose slightly. "You figured that out in 3 hours? It is not complicated. Just mathematics." The rancher pushed off the doorframe and crossed to the desk, looking down at the notations Jonas had made in the margins. He stood close, his hip nearly touching Jonas's shoulder, and Jonas had to concentrate very hard on breathing normally. "Show me," Cade said. Jonas walked him through the numbers, explaining his reasoning, feeling the rancher's attention like a physical weight. When he finished, Cade was quiet for a long moment. "You have a gift for this," he said finally. "It is just arithmetic." "No." Cade's hand came down on Jonas's shoulder, heavy and warm. "It is more than that. You see patterns other people miss. That is valuable." The praise hit Jonas like whiskey on an empty stomach, warming him from the inside out. He turned his head, meaning to thank Cade, and found himself inches from the rancher's face. This close, he could see the flecks of blue in those gray eyes, could feel the warmth of Cade's breath. Time seemed to suspend. Jonas's pulse roared in his ears. Cade's hand tightened on his shoulder, fingers pressing into muscle, and for one electric moment, Jonas thought. Cade stepped back abruptly, his hand falling away. "Keep working. I want a full inventory by week's end." Then he was gone, leaving Jonas sitting alone at the desk, trembling with something that felt dangerously close to need. The days took on a new rhythm after that. Jonas spent mornings doing ranch work, learning to handle livestock and mend equipment, and afternoons in the study, organizing Cade's financial chaos into something resembling order. The other ranch hands teased him about his soft job, but there was no real malice in it. They could see he worked as hard as any of them when he was in the fields. But it was the evenings Jonas lived for. After supper, after the other men had retreated to the bunkhouse or the saloon in town, Cade would sometimes call Jonas back to the study. They would go over the books together, Cade asking questions, Jonas explaining his methods, and slowly a pattern of trust began to form. Cade started asking his opinion on decisions. Should he sell the yearlings now or wait until spring? Was the new supplier in Billings worth the extra freight cost? Jonas offered his thoughts carefully at first, expecting to be dismissed. But Cade listened, actually listened, implemented his suggestions, treated him like a partner instead of a servant. And with every conversation, every moment of Cade's focused attention, Jonas felt himself falling deeper into something he could not name. One evening, 3 weeks into his time at the ranch, Jonas was updating the livestock registry when Cade poured 2 glasses of whiskey and set one in front of him without a word. Jonas stared at it, surprised. "You have earned it," Cade said, settling into the chair across from him. Jonas picked up the glass, the amber liquid catching the lamplight. "I have never had whiskey before." "No?" Cade's lips quirked slightly. "Then sip it. Do not gulp." Jonas obeyed, taking a small swallow. The burn made his eyes water and Cade's low chuckle rumbled through the room. "You will get used to it." They sat in comfortable silence, the only sounds the scratch of Jonas's pen and the crackle of the fire. Jonas felt something loosen in his chest, some tight knot of fear or loneliness beginning to unravel. For the first time since his mother died, he felt like he belonged somewhere. "Can I ask you something?" Jonas said quietly. "Depends on the question. Why did you hire me? I had no experience, no skills. You could have found a dozen better men." Cade swirled his whiskey, considering. "You want the truth?" "Always. I saw something in your eyes. Desperation, yes, but also determination. You were not looking for charity. You were looking for a chance to prove yourself." He met Jonas's gaze over the rim of his glass. "I respect that." Jonas's throat tightened with emotion he did not know how to express. "I will not let you down. I know you will not." The certainty in Cade's voice wrapped around Jonas like a blanket. He ducked his head, focusing on his ledger to hide the intensity of what he was feeling. But when he glanced up through his lashes, he found Cade still watching him with an expression that made his breath catch. "You should get some rest," Cade said, his voice rougher than before. "We have an early start tomorrow." Jonas nodded and stood, but as he reached the door, Cade called out, "Jonas." He turned back. "You are doing good work here. Better than good. I want you to know that." The words settled into Jonas's chest like stones, heavy and permanent. "Thank you, sir." He fled to the bunkhouse before he could do something foolish, like cross back to Cade and ask what else the rancher might want from him. Because the way Cade had been looking at him, the roughness in his voice, the tension crackling between them, it all pointed to something Jonas barely dared to hope for. That night he dreamed of large hands and whiskey-rough voices, of being pinned beneath storm-gray eyes that saw everything he was and everything he wanted to be. He woke hard and aching, shame flooding through him even as his body betrayed exactly what it craved. He was falling for Cade Morrison, had already fallen, if he was honest with himself, and he had no idea what to do about it except endure, and hope, and wait for the rancher to give him some sign that this impossible thing between them might be real. The 4th week brought a change in weather. Storm clouds gathered over the mountains, turning the sky bruise purple and heavy with the promise of rain. The other ranch hands talked nervously about flash floods and lost livestock, but Cade seemed unconcerned, methodically preparing the ranch for whatever came. Jonas worked alongside him, moving cattle to higher ground, securing equipment, reinforcing the barn doors. The wind picked up as afternoon faded to evening, whipping Jonas's hair into his eyes and carrying the electric scent of approaching storm. "We need to check the eastern fence line," Cade said, as the first fat droplets began to fall. "One more section, and we can call it done." They rode out together, the rain starting slow but building steadily. By the time they reached the fence, water poured from the sky in sheets, soaking them both to the skin. Jonas's fingers fumbled with the wire, numbed by cold, and he cursed under his breath. "Here." Cade's hands covered his, warm despite the rain, guiding his movements. "Twist it like this. Feel how the tension holds?" Jonas nodded, too aware of Cade's body pressed against his back, sheltering him from the worst of the wind. They worked in tandem, Cade's hands never quite leaving Jonas's, until the repair was complete. Thunder cracked overhead, so close Jonas felt it in his chest. The horses spooked, yanking at their tethers, and Cade grabbed Jonas's arm. "There is a line shack half a mile north. We need to wait this out." They ran through the downpour, leading the skittish horses, until a small wooden structure emerged from the gray curtain of rain. Cade kicked open the door and they tumbled inside, dripping and breathless. The shack was barely larger than a prison cell, with a single narrow cot, a cold stove, and shelves stocked with emergency supplies. Cade shut the door against the howling wind and turned to find Jonas shivering violently, his lips tinged blue. "Get those wet clothes off before you catch your death," Cade ordered, already stripping off his own soaked shirt. Jonas's hands shook too badly to manage the buttons. Cade made an impatient sound and crossed to him, batting his hands away and working the buttons himself with quick efficiency. When he pulled the shirt from Jonas's shoulders, his knuckles brushed bare skin, and Jonas gasped at the contact. Cade's hands stilled. They stood frozen, Cade's fingers resting against Jonas's collarbone, the wet shirt hanging between them. Rain hammered the roof like drumbeats, and lightning flashed through the single window, illuminating Cade's face in stark relief. "You are always cold," Cade said quietly. "Always shivering. Do you ever get warm?" "Not since I came here." Jonas's voice was barely audible over the storm. "Not unless—" He stopped himself, but Cade's eyes had already darkened with understanding. "Unless what?" Jonas swallowed hard. The storm, the isolation, the whiskey still warming his blood from earlier, it all conspired to strip away his caution. "Not unless you are near me." The confession hung between them, raw and honest. Cade's jaw clenched, and his hands tightened on Jonas's shoulders, fingers digging into muscle. "You should not say things like that," Cade said, his voice strained. "Why not?" "It is the truth. Because it makes it harder for me to do the right thing, to keep my distance, to remember all the reasons I should not." He broke off, breathing hard. "Should not what?" Jonas stepped closer, closing the already minimal distance between them. "Should not touch me? Should not want me? Because I see the way you look at me, Cade. I feel it every time we are in the same room." "Jonas." It came out like a warning, but Cade did not step back. "I am tired of pretending," Jonas said, his voice gaining strength. "I am tired of lying awake at night wishing you would." He stopped, courage failing him at the last moment. "Wishing I would what?" Cade's hand slid down Jonas's arms, leaving trails of heat in their wake. "Say it. Wishing you would stop being so honorable. Wishing you would take what you want. Wishing you would take me." The last word had barely left his lips when Cade's control shattered. He pulled Jonas against him with bruising force, one hand fisting in his wet hair, the other splayed across his lower back. Their mouths collided with desperate hunger, and Jonas made a sound that was half sob, half moan. This kiss was different from the one in the study. That had been a test, a question. This was an answer. Cade kissed him like he was drowning, and Jonas was air, like he had been holding back for so long that the release was almost violent in its intensity. Jonas kissed back with everything he had, all the longing and frustration and need pouring out of him. His hands found Cade's bare chest, mapping the landscape of scars and muscle, and Cade groaned into his mouth. "We cannot," Cade said against his lips, even as his hands contradicted his words, roaming Jonas's back with possessive hunger. "I am twice your age. I am your employer. This is wrong. I do not care." Jonas pulled back just enough to meet his eyes. "I do not care about any of that. I only care about this. About you." Outside, the storm raged with apocalyptic fury. Inside the tiny shack, two men stood locked together, balanced on the edge of something that would change everything. Cade searched Jonas's face, looking for doubt or fear, but found only raw wanting. "If I start this," Cade said, his voice rough as gravel, "I will not be able to stop. I will not be gentle. I will claim every part of you until there is nothing left that is not mine." Heat flooded Jonas's body at the words, at the dark promise in Cade's eyes. "Yes," he breathed. "Yes, that is what I want. Make me yours." Something feral flashed across Cade's face. He lifted Jonas effortlessly, carrying him the 3 steps to the narrow cot and laying him down with surprising care despite the hunger burning in his eyes. The storm shook the walls around them, but neither noticed. They were creating their own storm, one that had been building since the moment Jonas stepped off that stagecoach. And when the lightning flashed again, illuminating their tangled forms, it lit not just bodies joining, but souls finally finding their missing pieces. In that tiny shack, with rain hammering the roof and wind howling through the cracks, Jonas learned what it meant to belong completely to someone. And Cade, who had been alone for so long he had forgotten what warmth felt like, finally came home. The breaking point came on a Saturday night. The other ranch hands had ridden into town for whiskey and women, leaving the ranch quiet except for the horses and the wind. Jonas was in the study, finishing the quarterly accounts, when Cade appeared in the doorway holding a bottle and 2 glasses. "You have been working too hard," the rancher said. "Take a break." Jonas set down his pen. watching as Cade poured generous measures of whiskey and settled into the chair across from him. The lamplight carved shadows across Cade's face, making him look younger and more dangerous all at once. "The accounts are nearly done," Jonas said. "Another hour, and they can wait." Cade pushed a glass toward him. "Drink with me." There was something different in his voice tonight, something looser, and Jonas realized the rancher had already been drinking before he came to the study. Not drunk, but relaxed in a way Jonas had never seen before. They drank in silence for a while, and Jonas felt the whiskey warming his blood, loosening the tight control he kept over his thoughts. He found himself watching Cade more openly than usual, tracing the strong line of his jaw, the breadth of his shoulders, the way his large hands cradled the glass with surprising delicacy. "You are staring," Cade said without looking up. Heat flooded Jonas's face. "I apologize, sir. I did not tell you to stop." The words hung in the air between them, loaded with meaning Jonas was afraid to interpret. He took another swallow of whiskey, needing the courage. "Can I ask you something personal?" Jonas heard himself say. Cade's eyes lifted to his, unreadable in the dim light. "You can ask. I might not answer. Have you ever been married?" "No." "Why not?" Cade's jaw tightened slightly. "Because I never found anyone who understood what I needed." "What do you need?" The question came out quieter than Jonas intended, almost a whisper. Cade's gaze intensified, pinning him in place, and Jonas felt his heart hammering against his ribs. "Someone strong enough to stand beside me," Cade said slowly. "Not behind me, not above me, beside me. Someone who will not break when things get hard. Someone I can trust completely." "That sounds lonely." "It is." Cade drained his glass and poured another. "What about you? You leave anyone behind in Chicago?" "No. I have never—" Jonas stopped, unsure how to finish that sentence without revealing too much. "Never what?" "Never wanted anyone. Not like that." The confession tasted like ash on his tongue, but the whiskey had loosened his control. "I thought there was something wrong with me." Cade's expression shifted, something dark and hungry moving behind his eyes. "There is nothing wrong with you." "How do you know?" "Because I recognize what I see when I look at you." The air between them crackled with tension so thick Jonas could barely breathe. His pulse roared in his ears and every instinct screamed at him to run, to put distance between them before this went somewhere he could not come back from. But he did not move. "What do you see?" he whispered. Cade stood slowly, setting down his glass with deliberate care. He crossed to Jonas's side of the desk, each step measured and purposeful. Jonas tilted his head back, looking up at the massive man towering over him, and felt something inside him crack open. "I see someone who wants to be brave enough to ask for what he needs," Cade said, his voice dropping to gravel. "But does not know how." "And if I asked?" Jonas's voice shook. "What would happen?" Cade's hand came up, fingers sliding into Jonas's hair with shocking gentleness. "That depends on what you ask for." Jonas's breath caught. Every nerve in his body was on fire, every thought narrowed down to the feeling of Cade's fingers against his scalp, the heat of that massive body so close to his own. "I do not know what to ask for," he admitted. "I have never done this before." "I know." Cade's thumb traced the shell of his ear, sending shivers racing down Jonas's spine. "That is what makes you dangerous." "Dangerous how?" "Because you make me want things I have no business wanting. Because every time you look at me, I have to remind myself why I cannot touch you. Because you are young and inexperienced and I should send you away before I ruin you completely." The confession was raw, honest, and it shattered the last of Jonas's resistance. He stood, the chair scraping back, bringing himself inches from Cade's chest. He had to crane his neck to meet those storm-gray eyes, but he did not care. "What if I want to be ruined?" he breathed. Cade's control visibly fractured. His hand tightened in Jonas's hair, just shy of painful, and his other hand came up to grip Jonas's jaw, tilting his face upward. They stood frozen like that, breathing each other's air, balanced on a knife's edge. "You do not know what you are asking for," Cade said, his voice strained. "Then show me." The words had barely left his lips when Cade's mouth crashed down on his. The kiss was not gentle, it was hungry and demanding, all tongue and teeth and desperation that had been building for weeks. Jonas gasped against Cade's mouth and the rancher swallowed the sound, kissing him deeper, claiming him with an intensity that made Jonas's knees buckle. Cade caught him, one arm banding around his waist, lifting him effortlessly and setting him on the edge of the desk. Jonas's legs parted automatically, and Cade stepped between them, pressing their bodies together from chest to hip. The contact was overwhelming. Too much, and not enough all at once. Jonas kissed back clumsily, inexperience making him uncertain. But Cade did not seem to care. His hands mapped Jonas's body like he was memorizing territory, sliding down his sides, gripping his hips, pulling him closer until there was no space left between them. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Cade rested his forehead against Jonas's. "We should not be doing this," he said, but his hands did not stop moving, tracing patterns on Jonas's lower back that made him tremble. "I do not care," Jonas gasped. "I do not care about should or should not. I only care about this. About you." Cade pulled back enough to look at him, his eyes searching Jonas's face for something. Regret, maybe. Fear. But Jonas let him see everything, all the longing and need and desperate want he had been hiding for weeks. "If we do this," Cade said carefully, "there is no going back. You understand that? I do not want to go back. The world will not be kind to us. The world has never been kind to me anyway." Something fierce flashed in Cade's expression. He cupped Jonas's face in both hands, those massive palms cradling him with devastating gentleness. "I will not share you. If this happens, you are mine. Only mine." The possessiveness in his voice should have frightened Jonas. Instead, it sent heat flooding through his entire body. "Yes," he breathed. "Yes, I am yours." Cade kissed him again, slower this time, thorough, like he had all the time in the world to learn the shape of Jonas's mouth. His hands slid down to Jonas's thighs, gripping hard enough to bruise, and Jonas made a sound he had never heard himself make before, something between a gasp and a plea. "Upstairs," Cade said against his mouth. "Not here. Not like this." He lifted Jonas bodily, carrying him like he weighed nothing. Jonas wrapped his legs around Cade's waist, clinging to those broad shoulders as the rancher navigated the stairs to his bedroom. The door clicked shut behind them, and Cade set Jonas down beside the bed, stepping back just far enough to look at him. "Last chance," Cade said, his voice rough. "You can still walk away." Jonas reached for the buttons of his shirt, fingers trembling but determined. "I am not walking anywhere." What followed was a revelation. Cade was demanding, but patient, pushing Jonas to the edge and then pulling him back, teaching him with hands and mouth and body how to give and take pleasure. He was relentless in his attention, learning every sound Jonas made, every place that made him gasp or shudder or beg. Jonas had never felt anything like it. This overwhelming sense of being completely known, completely seen. Cade touched him like he was something precious and breakable, even as he demanded surrender with every deliberate movement. And Jonas gave it, gave everything, holding nothing back. When it was over, they lay tangled together in Cade's bed, Jonas's head on the rancher's chest, listening to the steady thunder of his heartbeat. Cade's hand moved slowly through his hair, gentle in a way that made Jonas's throat tight with emotion. "Are you all right?" Cade asked quietly. Jonas nodded against his chest. "Better than all right." "I was not too rough?" "No." Jonas tilted his head to look up at him. "You were perfect." Cade's expression softened, and he pressed a kiss to Jonas's forehead. "Stay here tonight. We will figure out the rest in the morning." Jonas curled closer, feeling safe and wanted in a way he had never experienced. The world outside this room might be harsh and unforgiving, but here, wrapped in Cade's arms, he finally understood what it meant to belong to someone. Morning came too soon. Jonas woke to find himself alone in Cade's bed, the space beside him already cold. Panic spiked through him had the rancher regretted what happened. Was Jonas expected to pretend nothing had changed? He dressed quickly in yesterday's clothes and made his way downstairs, following the scent of coffee to the kitchen. Cade stood at the stove, fully dressed, his back to the door. He turned when he heard Jonas enter, and the heat in his eyes drove away any lingering doubt. "Coffee?" Cade offered, already pouring a second cup. Jonas accepted it, their fingers brushing during the exchange. "I thought maybe you—" "No." Cade set down his cup and pulled Jonas close, kissing him thoroughly despite the early hour. "I do not regret it. I just needed to think about how we handle this." "What do you mean?" Cade sighed, one hand coming up to cup Jonas's face. The other hands will be back this afternoon. They cannot know about us. Not yet. Maybe not ever. The words stung, even though Jonas understood their necessity. So we pretend? During the day, yes. When we are alone. Cade's thumb traced Jonas's lower lip. When we are alone, you are still mine. The possessiveness in his voice sent heat curling through Jonas's belly. I can do that. It will not be easy. I do not care. Jonas leaned into Cade's touch. I would rather have you in secret than not have you at all. Cade pulled him into a fierce embrace, his face buried in Jonas's hair. They stood like that for a long moment, holding each other in the quiet morning light, stealing what comfort they could before the world intruded again. The next weeks were sweet torture. During the day, Jonas and Cade maintained careful distance, their interactions professional and impersonal. Jonas worked alongside the other ranch hands, learning to hide his constant awareness of Cade's presence. But every accidental brush of hands, every moment their eyes met across the yard, carried the weight of unspoken promises. The nights were different. After the bunkhouse lights went out, Jonas would wait until he was certain everyone was asleep, then slip out the back door and across the yard to the main house. Cade would be waiting, pulling him inside with hungry kisses, making up for all the hours they had to pretend indifference. They learned each other in those stolen hours. Cade taught Jonas how to be quiet when pleasure threatened to undo him, how to muffle his sounds against Cade's shoulder or the pillow. Jonas learned to read Cade's moods, to know when the rancher needed gentleness and when he needed something harder, more intense. And they talked. Cade shared stories of his past, the ranch he had built from nothing, the loneliness that had carved hollows in him over the years. Jonas told him about Chicago, about his mother's death, about the desperation that had driven him west. They built something between them that went deeper than physical need, a foundation of trust and understanding that made everything else possible. But secrets have a way of revealing themselves, no matter how carefully they are kept. It happened on a Wednesday afternoon. Jonas was working in the study when one of the ranch hands, a grizzled man named Coleman, came looking for Cade. Jonas directed him to the north pasture, but Coleman lingered in the doorway, his eyes sharp and assessing. You spend a lot of time up here, he observed. Jonas kept his expression neutral. The books need maintaining. Funny, the boss never cared about books before you showed up. Maybe he realized their importance. Coleman stepped into the room, and Jonas felt his pulse quicken with unease. Or maybe he just likes having you around. I do not know what you are implying. I think you do. Coleman's smile was thin and cruel. I see things, boy. I notice when people slip out of the bunkhouse at night. I notice when they do not come back until dawn. Jonas's blood ran cold. You are mistaken. Am I? Coleman leaned against the desk, too close. See, I do not care what two men do in private. But some of the other hands, they might not be so understanding, might think it is worth mentioning to the boss, might wonder if special treatment is being earned on your back instead of through honest work. The implication made Jonas sick with rage and fear. Get out. Or what? You will tell Cade I was bothering you? Coleman's eyes glittered with malice. That would be an interesting conversation. Wonder what he would say. Before Jonas could respond, Cade's voice cut through the room like a blade. He would say you have exactly 5 seconds to get off my property before I put a bullet between your eyes. Both men turned to find Cade standing in the doorway, his rifle held with casual menace, his expression colder than Jonas had ever seen it. Coleman paled. Boss, I heard what you were just doing. Cade advanced into the room, and Coleman stumbled backward. You were threatening someone under my protection. You were making assumptions about things that are none of your business. And you were doing it in my house. I did not mean any offense. I just thought. You thought you could leverage what you think you know to get something from me. Money, maybe. Or special treatment of your own. Cade's voice was deadly quiet. You thought wrong. Coleman's eyes darted between Cade and Jonas, calculation evident on his face. Then, he made his fatal mistake. He sneered. Everyone is going to know what you are. Both of you. I will make sure of it. The rifle butt caught him across the jaw with stunning speed. Coleman went down hard, blood streaming from his mouth, and Cade stood over him with murder in his eyes. You will not say a word to anyone, Cade said softly, because if you do, I will destroy you. I will make sure no ranch in 3 territories will hire you. I will tell everyone you are a thief and a liar. I will ruin your name so completely that you will be begging for scraps in the street." Coleman spat blood onto the floor. "You cannot do that. Watch me." Cade hauled him upright with one hand and dragged him toward the door. "You have 1 hour to gather your things and get off my land. If I see you after that, I will not be as forgiving." He threw Coleman out the front door like he weighed nothing. The man stumbled, caught himself, and ran for the bunkhouse without looking back. When Cade returned to the study, Jonas was shaking. The rancher pulled him into a fierce embrace, one hand cradling the back of his head. "He is gone," Cade murmured. "He cannot hurt you. He knows," Jonas said against Cade's chest. "He will tell everyone. Let him try. I will handle it. Cade, you could lose everything because of me. The ranch, your reputation. I do not care." Cade pulled back enough to look at him, his eyes fierce. "I do not care what I lose as long as I do not lose you." The words settled into Jonas's chest like anchors. "You mean that? Every word." Cade cupped his face in both hands. "I have spent 20 years building this ranch, but I would burn it to the ground before I gave you up." Jonas surged up on his toes, kissing Cade with desperate intensity. The rancher responded in kind, pouring everything he felt into the kiss, possession, and protection, and something that felt terrifyingly close to love. When they finally pulled apart, Cade rested his forehead against Jonas's. "We need to be more careful." "I know, but I am not letting you go. I want you to understand that. Whatever happens, whoever finds out, I am not walking away from this." Jonas's eyes burned with emotion. "Neither am I." The next few days were tense. Coleman gathered his things and left without a word, but the damage was done. The other ranch hands looked at Jonas differently now, speculation in their eyes. Some were hostile, others merely curious, but the easy camaraderie Jonas had begun to build with them was gone. Cade handled it with characteristic directness. At the evening meal, he stood and addressed all the men. "There have been rumors," he said bluntly. "I am not going to confirm or deny anything. What I will say is this: Jonas Crawford is under my protection. Anyone who has a problem with that can collect their pay and leave. Anyone who stays will treat him with the same respect they would show me. Are we clear?" Silence greeted his words. Then, one by one, the men nodded. Some looked uncomfortable, but none challenged him. Cade's authority was absolute, and they all knew it. After that, an uneasy peace settled over the ranch. The hands avoided Jonas when they could, but they did not harass him, and slowly, grudgingly, a few of them even began to warm to him again. His competence was undeniable, and Cade's unwavering support carried weight. But the incident had changed something fundamental. Jonas and Cade no longer had to hide completely. They still kept their relationship private, but there was a freedom in not having to pretend total indifference. Cade's hand would linger on Jonas's shoulder a moment too long. Jonas would meet his eyes across the dinner table and not have to look away. It was not perfect. It was not safe. But it was theirs, and that was enough. 3 months after Jonas first arrived at the ranch, Cade called him to the study after supper. Jonas found him standing by the window, looking out at the land painted gold by the setting sun. "I have been thinking," Cade said without turning around. Jonas waited, sensing the weight of whatever was coming. "This ranch is too much for one man to run alone. I need a partner, someone who understands both the numbers and the work, someone I can trust completely." Jonas's heart began to pound. "What are you saying?" Cade turned to face him, his expression serious. "I am saying I want you to be my partner. Equal share in everything. The ranch, the profits, the decisions. All of it. Cade, I cannot accept that. I have not earned. You have earned it 10 times over. You saved this ranch from financial ruin. You work harder than any 3 men. And more than that." Cade crossed to him, taking his hands. "I do not want to spend the rest of my life pretending you are just my employee. I want to build something with you. Not just a ranch, a life." Jonas's throat was too tight to speak. He had come west with nothing, expecting nothing, and somehow found everything he had never dared to want. "Say yes," Cade said softly. "Build this with me." Jonas looked into those storm-gray eyes and saw his entire future reflected back. It would not be easy. The world would not accept them. But standing here with Cade's hands warm around his own, Jonas knew he had already made his choice weeks ago, the moment he let himself fall. "Yes," he whispered. "Yes, I will build this with you." Cade pulled him close, kissing him with a tenderness that made Jonas's eyes sting. When they pulled apart, the rancher smiled, a rare, full smile that transformed his entire face. "Then we have work to do, partner." They sealed the agreement with the lawyer in town the following week. If anyone suspected the true nature of their partnership, they kept it to themselves. Jonas Crawford and Cade Morrison became equal owners of the Morrison Ranch, their names linked in legal documents that would outlast them both. The years that followed were not without challenges. There were droughts and hard winters, cattle rustlers and fluctuating markets. There were people who looked at them with suspicion and others who refused to do business with them at all. But Jonas and Cade built something that lasted. They expanded the ranch, made it profitable, earned respect through sheer competence and integrity. And at night, behind closed doors, they built something else entirely. A home, a partnership, a love that grew deeper with every passing season. Jonas never forgot the desperation that had brought him west, the hollow emptiness that had driven him to risk everything on a crumpled advertisement, because that desperation had led him to Cade, to this life, to discovering that he was not broken or wrong or alone. He was exactly where he was meant to be, standing beside a man who saw him completely and loved him anyway. And that was worth more than all the gold in Montana, worth more than safety or acceptance or anything the world might offer in trade. On quiet evenings, when the work was done and the ranch was sleeping, Jonas would sometimes catch Cade watching him with an expression of wonder, like he still could not quite believe this was real. "What are you thinking?" Jonas would ask, and Cade would pull him close, pressing a kiss to his temple. "That I was alone for so long, I forgot what it felt like to have someone to come home to. And then you showed up, scared and stubborn, and changed everything." "I am not scared anymore," Jonas would say. "No." Cade would smile against his skin. "You are not. You are the bravest person I know." And in those moments, wrapped in each other's arms beneath the vast Montana sky, they were not rancher and farmhand, not employer and employee, not even just lovers. They were two souls who had found each other against all odds, who had chosen each other despite the world's judgment, who had built something real and lasting from nothing but hope and desperate need and the courage to reach for what they wanted. They were home. Finally, impossibly, completely home, and nothing in the world could take that away from them. 5 years passed like water flowing over stone, steady and transformative. The Morrison Ranch prospered under their joint leadership, expanding to twice its original size. Jonas's business acumen combined with Cade's ranching expertise created something neither could have built alone. They hired more men, bought better stock, and earned a reputation for fair dealing that brought clients from 3 territories. But success came with scrutiny. As the ranch grew, so did the whispers. 2 men living together, working together, building something together without wives or families to explain their partnership. Some folks accepted it with shrugs, others made their disapproval known in sidelong glances and refused handshakes. Jonas learned to carry it, the weight of other people's judgment. Cade taught him how to stand tall when men spat at their feet, how to meet hatred with dignity instead of violence. But there were nights when it wore on him, when the constant vigilance of keeping their truth hidden felt like slowly suffocating. On one such night, Jonas sat on the porch watching the sun paint the mountains gold and crimson. Cade emerged from the house carrying 2 glasses of whiskey and settled beside him on the bench they had built together the previous summer. "You are thinking too loud," Cade observed, handing him a glass. Jonas smiled despite his melancholy. "Am I that transparent?" "Only to me." Cade's shoulder pressed against his, a small touch they could risk in the privacy of their own land. "What is weighing on you?" Jonas was quiet for a long moment, watching the light fade. "Do you ever wish we could just tell people? Stop pretending? Stop editing every word and gesture? Every day." Cade's honesty surprised him, "But then I think about what we would lose. The ranch, our reputation, maybe our lives if we encountered the wrong people at the wrong time. Is the truth worth that risk? I do not know anymore." Jonas turned to look at him, at the gray threaded heavily through Cade's beard now, at the lines around his eyes that deepened when he smiled. "Sometimes I think about what it would be like to walk into town holding your hand, To introduce you as my partner and not have to qualify what that means. To kiss you in daylight instead of hiding in the dark. Cade's expression softened. He set down his glass and cupped Jonas's face in his palm, thumb stroking his cheekbone with infinite tenderness. I would give anything to give you that. You know I would. But you cannot. No, I cannot. The admission carried the weight of years of acceptance. All I can give you is this. These moments. This life we have built together. My name beside yours on every deed and document. Is it enough? Jonas covered Cade's hand with his own, pressing it harder against his face. It has to be. They sat in silence as the stars emerged, one by one, mapping constellations across the vast Montana sky. And Jonas realized that perhaps this was its own kind of freedom. Not the freedom to love openly, but the freedom to love truly, without compromise or pretense when they were alone together. The next morning brought unexpected visitors. 2 young men rode up to the ranch just after breakfast, their clothes marking them as city folk uncomfortable on horseback. Jonas watched from the barn as Cade went to greet them. And something about the taller one's face stirred recognition. "Excuse me," the young man said, dismounting awkwardly. "I am looking for Cade Morrison." "You found him." Cade's voice was neutral, assessing. "What is your business?" The young man's companion, smaller and dark-haired, spoke up. "We heard this ranch is different, that you hire men who might not find work elsewhere. We need jobs, and we need—" He glanced at his companion, something vulnerable passing between them. "We need somewhere safe." Understanding dawned in Cade's eyes. Jonas saw it happen, saw the way the rancher's posture shifted from defensive to protective. He crossed the yard to stand beside Cade, their shoulders nearly touching. "You heard right," Jonas said quietly. "This ranch is different, but you need to understand what that means. Hard work, long hours, and discretion. What happens here, stays here. Can you manage that?" The taller man's eyes widened as he looked between Jonas and Cade, clearly reading what was unspoken. "Yes, sir, we can, we will." Cade studied them for a long moment, then nodded. "Bunkhouse is that building there. Get settled. Then find our foreman for your assignments. And boys," he waited until they met his gaze, "you are safe here, but only if you remember that safety requires silence. Understand?" "Yes, sir. Thank you, sir." As they led their horses away, Jonas felt something shift in his chest. He turned to Cade, finding the rancher already watching him with knowing eyes. "We are building something bigger than just a ranch, are we not?" Jonas said. "Seems like it." Cade's hand brushed Jonas's lower back, too brief for anyone watching to note but enough to send warmth flooding through him. "Maybe that is what we were always meant to do. Build a place where men like us do not have to hide who they are. At least, not from each other." Over the following years, more men arrived. Some came seeking work, others came seeking refuge. Each was vetted carefully, and each was given the same speech about discretion and safety. The Morrison Ranch became known in certain circles as a place where different rules applied, where men could be themselves as long as they worked hard and kept the ranch's secrets. Jonas watched it happen with a mixture of pride and wonder. What had started as 2 lonely souls finding each other had grown into something larger, a community of sorts, built on mutual protection and understanding. The ranch hands formed bonds among themselves, some finding companionship or love, others simply grateful for a place where they did not have to constantly guard their words and gestures. But this growth brought new dangers. Rumors intensified. The local preacher began giving sermons about sin and perversion. Though he never named names, town merchants became less friendly, some refusing to serve anyone from the Morrison Ranch. The isolation Jonas had once craved now felt like a cage. It came to a head one autumn evening when a group of men from town rode onto the property carrying torches and rifles. Jonas counted 15 of them, led by the preacher himself, faces twisted with righteous fury. Cade met them at the gate, rifle in hand, every ranch hand standing behind him in a show of solidarity. Jonas stood at his right hand, his own weapon held steady despite his racing heart. "This is private property," Cade called out. "State your business or leave." The preacher urged his horse forward. "We know what you are running here, Morrison. We know what kind of men you harbor. This is a Christian community, and we will not tolerate such wickedness in our midst. Then I suggest you stay in your community and off my land." Cade's voice was cold steel. You have no authority here. We have God's authority. We have come to cleanse this place of sin. No. Jonas stepped forward, surprising even himself with his boldness. You have come to hurt people who have done nothing wrong. You have come to destroy what you do not understand. But we will not let you. The preacher's eyes narrowed on him. And who are you to speak? Morrison's catamite? His kept boy? The slur should have stung. But Jonas had heard worse. He felt Cade tense beside him and laid a warning hand on his arm. I am his partner, equal owner of this ranch, and you are trespassing on our land. Murmurs rippled through the mob. Some looked uncertain now, perhaps realizing this confrontation would not be as easy as they had imagined. The Morrison ranch employed 30 men, all loyal, all armed. The odds were not in the mob's favor. We could burn you out, the preacher threatened. Drive you from this territory. You could try. Cade's voice carried absolute certainty. But I promise you this, if a single building on this ranch catches fire, if a single one of my men is harmed, I will make sure everyone knows who was responsible. I have friends in the territorial government. I have lawyers. I have resources you cannot match, and I will use every single one of them to destroy you and everyone with you tonight. The threat hung in the air, backed by the sight of 30 armed men willing to defend their home. Slowly, the resolve began to drain from the mob. One by one, they turned their horses. The preacher remained a moment longer, face purple with impotent rage. This is not over, he spat. Yes, Cade said quietly. It is, because if you come back, I will not be so understanding. Now get off my land. They rode away into the darkness, and the ranch hands erupted in cheers. But Jonas felt no victory, only exhaustion and sadness that it had come to this. Cade must have sensed it because he turned to address the men. Double the watch rotation. No one goes to town alone. We stay alert, we stay together, and we protect what is ours. Understood? A chorus of agreement rang out. As the men dispersed, Cade finally turned to Jonas, and the carefully controlled mask he had worn during the confrontation cracked. He pulled Jonas into a fierce embrace right there in the yard, in front of everyone, no longer caring who saw. You spoke up for us, Cade said against his hair. You claimed me in front of them all. I claimed us, Jonas corrected, holding him tighter. I am done hiding what you mean to me. If they already know, if they already hate us, then what is the point of pretending? Cade pulled back enough to look at him, something fierce and proud burning in his eyes. Then we stop pretending. At least here, on our land, we stop hiding. And so they did. The ranch became an open secret, a place where men lived and loved without apology within their borders. They still kept a careful face when they went to town, but on the ranch itself, freedom rang clear. Jonas learned to walk beside Cade without measuring the distance between them, learned to accept small affections in front of others without flinching, learned that home was not a place you hid yourself, but a place you could finally be whole. Years later, when Jonas was 35 and Cade was 58, they sat on that same porch watching another sunset paint the sky. The ranch had outlasted its critics, thrived despite opposition, become legendary in certain circles as a place of sanctuary. Do you ever regret it? Jonas asked. Everything you gave up to build this with me? Cade took his hand openly, lacing their fingers together. I gave up nothing. I gained everything. A partner, a purpose, a family. Of sorts. He gestured to the ranch spread before them, where men worked and laughed and lived without fear. This is my legacy. Ours. And I would not trade a single day of it. Jonas rested his head on Cade's shoulder, watching the stars emerge. He thought about the desperate young man who had stepped off that stagecoach with nothing but hope and hunger. Thought about the lonely rancher who had taken a chance on someone with no experience or skills. They had built something impossible together, had turned desperation into strength, loneliness into love, secrets into sanctuary. The world still judged them, still whispered and speculated. But here, on this land they had fought for and built together, they were finally, completely free. I love you, Jonas said quietly, the words still precious despite years of repetition. Cade pressed a kiss to his temple. I love you too. Always have. Since that first day when you looked up at me with those defiant eyes and refused to give up. You changed everything, Jonas Crawford. Jonas Morrison, he corrected with a smile. They had never married, could not marry, but had changed Jonas's name legally through an adoption document that made Cade his guardian. It was a legal fiction, but it gave them both the same last name, bound them in the eyes of the law, if not the church. Jonas Morrison, Cade agreed, his voice warm with satisfaction. My partner, my equal, my everything. And as the last light faded from the sky, they sat together in comfortable silence. Two men who had found in each other everything the world said they should not want. Who had built a life and a legacy on the foundation of refused shame and stubborn love. The ranch would outlast them both, would continue to be a sanctuary for men who needed it, a place where being different did not mean being broken. That was their gift to the future, proof that love could survive anything if you were brave enough to fight for it. And in the end, that was enough. More than enough. It was everything.